That's not when my life started to fall apart. That was like when it all came crashing down.
You talk a bit about your relationship breakdown.
When something's wrong and you know something's wrong, speak up. You're not in love when you are obsessing over someone whose character and whose life you don't really know.
Why do you think that people cheat when they're in relationships?
Some of the reasons that I will list will be triggering for some people, but it's very, very important to hear.
On June 2nd, 2014, your life, as you say in your book, It Begins With You, started to fall apart. Can you tell us a little bit about that time?
Yeah, I would say that that's not when my life started to fall apart. That was like when it all came crashing down. I had been married to my now ex-husband for exactly 2 years that day. And my mother was diagnosed a few months earlier with a very aggressive form of cancer. And I just found out that she was for sure going to pass away, and it was only a matter of time. And I had woken up to a miscarriage, and my husband decided that that was the time, that was his opportunity to flee our relationship. And we had a difficult marriage, but we were in a good place, so to speak, during that time. And so, yeah, it was everything falling apart at once, to the point where it was absolutely surreal, actually. I'm not one to romanticize these tragic moments in a person's life or in my life, but when I look back, it's like I felt like that was the day I died, but also the day that a completely different life was before me. And so that day was a very, probably the most pivotal moment in my life. One of, maybe, if not only the most. Yeah.
Obviously, what you've mentioned are just all really awful and hard things for anyone to deal with in life, just as a once-off, let alone all together. And I wonder for you, how did you navigate that time?
Well, I, when you go through something like that, you become, you go straight into survival mode. And when you're in survival mode, you are desperate to survive. And so, how did I deal with that? Well, therapy. I had a therapist, a couples therapist that I was using at the time, and spoke to her several times a week. Um, my family, mostly my two sisters, friends, my dog that kept me, walking every day. I had to get out. And I had a friend who was a coach, and this was before it was sort of trendy to be a coach. And she was a neighbor of mine. She lived in my building. And one day she found me when I was sitting outside with my dog. And it was actually, I believe it was I was literally like the day after all of this went down. And it would have been my 2-year wedding anniversary. And, we spoke, and she brought up Tony Robbins. And at the time, I didn't really know anything about him, other than my association with him to him was like he was the infomercial guy. And that's how I grew up, that's how I knew him. And I had taught yoga for many years. At that point, it was like I was teaching it for like something like 12 years and or more, and had been practicing it for 15 years. And so I was very entrenched in the wellness, yoga, meditation world, but not in the personal development world, as we kind of understand how it's blown up to be this thing today. And she sent me some videos, things that you actually at the time would not have been able to find on YouTube or anywhere else. And she said, I want you just to, this might really help you. Why don't you have a look or have a listen? And I'm sort of a skeptic at heart. And I thought, this is whatever. This is not going to help me. But When you're desperate, you'll try anything. And so I watched something of his where it was an intervention with him and this woman. It was almost 2 hours long. And again, this was not something you could find anywhere. And I learned more about what happened and what went wrong between my then husband and I than I did in, 2 years of therapy. And I thought, this is what makes sense to me. And I went deep dive into this journey of trying to understand, became obsessed with what makes a relationship work, because in my blueprint, nowhere was there like, oh, you're going to get divorced at, 40 years old and you're not going to have your kid and your mom is going to die. And I think that, we know that life rarely and turns out how we expect it to. But I hadn't been prepared to how different my life was going to turn out. And I did not know how to adapt to my new reality emotionally. And but I was searching for meaning. I was searching for meaning in all this. And I found it through studying his methodology, and then just literally studying relationships, psychology, male and female psychology, the psychology of relationships, personal development. I integrated all that into everything that I've known through the mind and the body connection. And that's what I dedicated my life to. So a big part of what helped me get through it all was, yes, my family, absolutely, leaning on my friends who, the ones who showed up, I'm eternally grateful for. I continued to teach yoga because at least teaching was the time when I couldn't be in my head and think about myself and the situation. But it was really penetrating this study of relationships, and that's actually what kept me going, was to figure it out. And then I was compelled to teach it because I was learning so much. And then little by little, and it was definitely several steps forward and then several steps back, I climbed my way out of the hole that I was in. And it took a long time, but I think it was finding purpose and meaning, and having some sort of intellectual stimulation and purpose throughout it. And that's how I got through. That's how I got through it. So with a lot of help. And then I went through a training to become a coach. And I have two of the most incredible mentors, one of the people is arguably one of the best therapists in the world and has mentored probably some of the biggest names that you know of. And they have been with me for the last 10 years. And this is how I was able to make it through.
That's beautiful. It's interesting. In your book, it begins with you. You talk a bit about your relationship breakdown, and there is a chapter that you speak about, and it's to do with, being truthful and telling the truth. And you
Yes.
tell a story about how you and your partner at the time went to see, it was in New York City, and it was Sleep No More. And I've actually seen it. When I went
Oh,
to
have you?
New York like a decade ago, I saw it.
Yeah.
I went there, and so Sleep No More, for people that don't know what it is, it was kind of like in this old building, and you went in and it was really abstract, but it was kind of quite erotic as well. And
Erotic performance art,
yeah,
basically, right?
yeah, it was super
It's
cool.
hard to explain it.
Yeah, and you'd go into these different rooms, and whoever you came with, you were separated from them. And there's a really interesting story that you tell about how you and your husband at the time had gotten along really well that day, the day before. Everything was peachy keen, and then that day you go and see Sleep No More, and he is just icy cold, and he's basically ignoring you throughout the time that you're in this. And you're internally freaking out, but you don't say anything. Can you talk to us a little bit about that?
Yeah. It's funny, when I was like, even before I wrote the book, I wanted to share that story because I feel like it was the time when I should have actually ended my relationship with him, but I didn't. And because I always said that before we got married, our relationship was like 90% kind of amazing. Like people loved to be around us. We were very compatible. There was like a real magic, but there was 10% that was extremely problematic. And you think when you get married that the 10% will go away, but actually the 10% became the 90%, and the 90% became the 10%.
Wow.
And this story that I tell, that I will elaborate on in just a moment, is really represented that 10%. And so we were about 7 months into our relationship, but we moved very quickly. We did everything that I tell people not to do. I mean, everything. I broke every rule, whatever, and we moved very quickly. So you may or may not know, but I'm sure many of your listeners can relate to this. If you move very quickly with someone and it's 7 months in, that 7 months is very significant. It feels like 7 years almost, 7 years
Mm.
of attachment, it feels like. And so, and this was like, there was just absolutely no way in my mind that we were not going to be together, that this was not going to be my quote unquote partner, my person. And we lived in Brooklyn at the time. And back then it wasn't like Uber. So we were in a car service going over the Brooklyn Bridge to go to Manhattan. To actually go where it was located was at this old club from way back in the day called Twilo, where I used to party my face off for years when I was in my very early 20s. And so I was like really excited. It was a date night. It was something new. And we're in the car, and he was just very, very cold. And I couldn't figure out why. And I kept on doing that thing where I say, "Is everything okay?" And he kept doing that thing. "Yeah, it's fine." Like totally lying to me and saying that everything was fine when it's not. And I grew up in a household where my father was very withdrawn emotionally, and you never knew what mood he was going to be in. And I developed hypervigilance from that, so I could tell when someone's mood is off. And so at the time I didn't realize it, but I know it now, and I knew it after, that my body was recognizing this feeling of something's wrong. You feel like you're the problem. They're not telling you something's wrong. You don't really know how to bring it up. So there's that awkwardness, that awkward silence, and you're just sitting there not knowing what's going on. And so we get to the venue, and as you know, they give you masks. They give you these masks that sort of look like the mask from Scream. And then they put you into this elevator and they separate you, and you go through this, montage of performance art. And the idea is that you can go through it in a couple of hours. You can stay as long or as short as you want, but if you're going to go through it, it's typically around average 2 hours. But people find each other again, even though you have a mask on. Like what
Yeah.
the people that you came with, what they're wearing. Like who the person.
Yeah.
You don't have to actually see the features of the
Yeah,
face. You
of
know who
course.
someone is,
Yeah.
of course. So we separate, and there were a couple of times where I would see him, and I could tell he would see me, and I thought, oh my God, now we'll embrace. And because that's what people do, they find each other, then they embrace, and then they finish the sort of the journey of that night together. And he pretended like he didn't see me, and continued to pretend like he didn't see me until the very, very end. And then we left and we went out for dinner, and I said nothing. All I did was pray and hope that it would be okay. And I felt incredibly uncomfortable, and I felt incredibly insecure, and I felt incredibly uncertain. And we never talked about it again. And that was very significant, because my not talking about it was the probably the one of the biggest forms of self-betrayal,
Mm.
because I thought, if I say something, then maybe it'll be a fight, or I don't want to rock the boat. and I would do it very differently. And so in that chapter, which talks about all different scenarios of telling the truth and regardless of your relationship status, I talk about how important it is to speak up when you are not, when something's wrong and you know something's wrong and you're not treated with the love and respect that you deserve. And if it means rocking the boat and then there becoming a fight or the demise, the end of the relationship, so be it. Because ignoring that, that would become that dynamic, and that pattern would become a pattern that plagued our marriage. And so, yeah, that's what happened.
I wonder, and you may not know the answer to this, what was up with him? Like, what was just generally up with him? Was he just thinking, I'm not sure if I want to be in this relationship? Like, when people are like that, they go all cold and strange and stuff. It's such a, I mean, we've all had it. We've all had, it could be a friend or a colleague where you're like, you know, you feel like saying, what the fuck's wrong with you? You know,
Yeah,
like,
exactly. Like,
what's
what the
happening?
fuck?
Because I don't feel
Yeah,
like I've done anything wrong, and like you're being really
yeah,
weird. And if you're not going to say anything, then just like pull your socks up and act normal, you know?
yeah,
So I wonder, like, what even in your experience leads someone to be like that? It seems so childish to me.
yeah. My guess, I don't, is that something was bothering him and it had something to do with me. And he was very avoidant, and he didn't have the tools to bring it up to me. He didn't have the tools to express himself emotionally, to have that kind of conversation. I don't think he had the tools to process what it was that he was feeling. And so the only thing that he knew to do was just to pull away and withdraw. It's highly dysfunctional behavior, but I was just as dysfunctional as he was because I did not actually do anything about that. You know,
Mm.
today if that were to happen, I would go right in for it and just say, what was that? I don't like how that made me feel. I don't like that. That's not going to work with me. What was going on with you? We need to talk about this.
Mm.
And I would probably break up with the person, to be honest.
Yeah.
But I at least I would be very firm in having a conversation. It may not be in the car right there. I may have waited till we were at dinner to have that conversation. But boy, oh boy, would I not avoid it. So my dysfunction was just meeting his dysfunction.
Mm. It's so true. And what I love about your book is that, you know, the idea that it kind of starts from within, right? So, yeah, I'm a true believer that we attract who we are as well. And you, the whole idea is that you do the inner work and work out who you are and build yourself up to get to the point that you're able to be available to other people. And when we feel secure and whole, which does take a lot of time, and comfortable within ourselves, we will meet someone that will reflect kind of the version that where we're at. And there's a beautiful example that you use for this in when you're coaching someone and they talk about being in relationships with people that are just always cheating on them. And it seems like for this person that everyone cheats and all the good men are taken. And it's just, we've got a whole world of cheaters or they're married, you know?
Exactly.
You know? So can you talk to us a little bit about that and why, in that scenario of you working with that lady, she was really always, for some reason, going out with people that would betray her. They were cheating on her and infidelity would occur.
Yeah. So it's one thing to experience an infidelity portrayal one time. It's another thing where your relationship history, everyone is cheating on you. That then makes me wonder, okay, maybe it's who you're choosing, the kind of men who you're attracted to, and the red flags that you're ignoring. Because it's it's very unusual for that to happen. And if it keeps happening, then something needs to be explored within. And it turned out that, yeah, she was choosing men who, I mean, had lots of red flags. They had terrible drinking problems. They had a history of cheating that she knew about. She would also, excuse me, she would engage in, fighting with them. So it was just like this toxicity, and she felt, every time she wouldn't learn the lesson. She wouldn't learn the lesson. She would just keep going after the same person in a different human, right? The same type of person in a different human. And it's difficult when you're working with someone when they have a belief, because a belief is anything that you feel 100% certain on. So to challenge someone's belief can take a lot, and they can say, well, look at the evidence. And then I have to say, well, let's talk about these men and all the things that they had in common. And when you can start to see, oh yeah, I ignored this thing and I ignored that thing. And, I also felt very insecure, and I didn't even feel like I'm worthy of a man who's actually fully committed to me. So when you start to dig deeper, I think, the main takeaway is know what your pattern is, and recognize that it can be broken. But you have to first see that there is a pattern there. And before you go into all men are like this or all women are like that, you have to take some responsibility for the choices that you've made and for the things that you've said or not said, because only then are you going to break the pattern. We can't break a pattern without first owning it. And then we have to challenge it. And then we start to break it by replacing it with a new pattern. And that's how it goes. That's the process. But it starts with personal responsibility.
Yeah.
And it's
so
not
true.
about and it's not shame. It's
Yeah.
like, look, isn't it amazing? You can actually change this.
Yeah.
And this is just your wiring. It really is just your wiring.
I absolutely agree. And I mean, I was thinking a lot about your book because I had read it, and you
Thank you.
reflect on your own life, and it was more so not so much in relationship with a romantic partner for myself, but I was thinking about even friendships and how, before I got into personal development work, I definitely, was insecure and didn't feel the way that I do now. Well, most people feel like. And I attracted not great people. I attracted sometimes in a work environment, bosses that weren't kind to me, or I would attract friends that came with drama. And I was like, it's interesting when you look back, and I think for years I haven't had anything like that. And it's not a coincidence that, that was just a rough patch in my life. It's like, no, I have changed. And so then the people that come into my life, my friends, my work, it's solid. It's, it's maintaining this beautiful kind of, aura around me of these lovely people, because that is what, I am reflecting back. So I think from a relationship perspective, that just makes so much sense. And again, it goes back to just being able to understand your patterns and have a belief system, one that is strong of good beliefs rather than those negative ones. That does take time, and it does take a lot of work.
It does. And one thing that I found interesting is that, this idea of like we retract who we are, um, sometimes there's exceptions.
Yes,
Like I've met
it's true.
people, right? Like I've met people who really struggle with their self-love, and somehow they were wise enough to choose someone who really loved them and really accepted them for who they are. And so I'm hesitant to share that, because I do want people to really work on their self-love. And the reality is that more times than not, if you really, really hate yourself, you are going to end up with people who don't treat you very well. That's more common. But sometimes people can be very smart, in choosing that right person. You
I
know,
agree. I've
they're
seen it. I've seen it with
You've
some
seen it
people.
too.
Yeah,
Yeah,
where
yeah.
they're a complete mess from the outside, but they've found a partner who is just the solid, you know, sees the beauty within inside of them and not
And
kind
they
of the
chose
mess.
that person.
Yeah, yeah,
Yes.
yeah. And this sounds mean, but I've seen it. People usually go, God, they've got to put up with a lot. You know,
Yeah.
you know,
Yeah,
but
you just never know.
it's. I wonder, from your experience talking about cheating, why do you think that people cheat when they're in relationships?
There's lots of different reasons, and some of the reasons that I will list will be triggering for some people, but it's very, very important to hear. So, one reason is they are that has nothing to do with their partner. They feel dead inside.
Mm,
They don't feel connected to purpose. They don't feel um, they feel insignificant,
mm,
and they meet someone, and all that newness makes them feel alive again. With that person, they can become another person.
mm,
And so it's not that it's like the having the affair with that other person is a metaphor for them finding a new identity. There are people who cheat because they feel really, really safe with their partner, but there's no passion. And so instead of working on the passion, they happen to meet, even if they don't seek someone out, they meet someone who stirs up that passion, and they think, I've got the perfect partner at home who makes me feel safe, and I've got this person here who makes me feel alive. And they don't know how to merge it into one relationship.
mm.
None of it is excusable in my book, but it's important to understand it. There are some people who their partner doesn't treat them very well, and instead of leaving the relationship, they have an affair. You know, they don't. Their partner stops having sex with them. They don't feel important to their partner anymore. They don't feel seen. They don't feel significant to them. So instead of communicating or instead of leaving, they cheat.
Mm.
And then there are some, and I like to call these people, these are the cheaters no matter what, no matter who they're with. And that's because they are um, terribly selfish and immature and have a constant need for validation. And they get validated through sex. And even if they're getting sex at home.
Mm.
And they need, like I said, they need that validation. And they also have, they don't know how to meet their need for novelty. So they are always, a lot of times, these people who just cheat no matter what have a lot of other things a lot of them may be addicts,
Mm.
you know, or something else going on. You know, there's sort of like a profile for this person, and they don't understand how to truly love and to be loved. They don't know how to sustain a relationship, and they really don't. They like to live on the edge a lot, and they make a lot of choices that are dangerous, that when people can find out could blow up, you know, friendships and
Mm.
relationships and marriages. So those are the main reasons.
That's so interesting. I would assume that the amount of relationships that are started from an affair don't last very long. But what have you seen in your work?
I would say for the most part that is true,
Mm.
but not always true. Not always true.
Yeah.
I've seen some work and last, but I've seen more that don't.
Yeah. And why is it that a lot don't?
You know, I wish there was one answer for this, but there's not. It could be that, you know, when it's in secret and when it's an affair,
Mm.
there's an excitement to that.
Mm.
And then once it's all out in the open and you actually have to do the relationship, you recognize, oh my God, we're not actually really right for each other. We were caught up in the moment of
Mm.
lust and passion. Also, it could be that, you just weren't thinking things through clearly, and too many people got hurt. And so that burden is on their shoulders.
Mm.
I've seen that happen too.
And I think, you touched on the novelty thing before, that I think a lot of people, who've been married for long periods of time, that novelty piece kind of like really lies dormant for a bit. And someone might meet someone, and as you said, wow, it's so exciting, this seems like it's so different, it with the fires lit and da da da. But after time, it becomes the same thing as what that other relationship was. If you ended up being with that other person, it's like, oh,
Yeah.
hold on, how long? Novelty, that is novelty because it's not the every day, So it's like, hold on, that what I found a bit boring before is now boring, but with someone else.
Because you take yourself wherever you go. And if you're not
Yes.
doing the work, if you're not reflecting and you're just jumping from one relationship to the next, you are just repeating patterns.
Yeah.
And that's why I wrote the book. That's one of the reasons why I wrote the book. So, who you choose to partner with matters, but not if you don't do the work and you don't self-reflect, you're just going to keep repeating the patterns, and you're just going to go through the exact same thing, to your wise point, with someone else.
Yeah. That is the
And I
best
see it all
line.
the time.
Yeah, that you just said, you take yourself wherever you go. And I think for
Yes.
people listening, that is so important to know. Like people might be thinking, oh, what about this person? What about that? But if you don't change yourself, then you're never going to be able to change. Like, your life's not going to be able to change. Um,
Yes.
my producer and I were talking before, and I was saying the Einstein quote of, doing the same thing over and over again and expecting a different result is insanity, right? So it's
Yes.
like, if you don't actually change, then nothing around you is going to change.
Exactly.
You know, Going back to that affair piece, you talk in the book a lot about the difference between lust and love. That is a chapter. And it was reminding me of my youth and the amount of times when I thought to myself, "Oh my God,
I'm in love.
I've met Don Juan, and I am the luckiest girl in the world. They're so good
Oh
looking.
yeah.
They're so this. All my Christmases
Yeah.
have come at once, and who needs any? Like, hello, heaven has arrived." And then
Yeah.
after a short period of time, you're like, "Ugh, this is really not what I had imagined." Can you talk to us a little bit about that and what the actual difference between lust and love is?
Yeah. Oh, it seems obvious, but it's not. It's very hard to define for many people. When we first meet someone and we're really excited about them, and even just like in the first few months of dating them, we're in the passion stage, we're in the obsessive stage, we're in the lust stage, we're in the limerence stage. And we think, because when we meet someone, they are the stimulus that triggers inside of us an awakening. And we awaken to this feeling of wholeness and aliveness. But it's something that's been in us the whole time. But they're the stimulant, they're the thing that triggered it, because they're so wonderful and whatnot. And so when we meet someone and that happens, we think, I can't let this person go. We become obsessive, we become attached. And look, this is part of the human condition. And there's so much heightened emotion. And when
Mm,
there's so much heightened emotion, it's hard to be rational. And we think, this is the person for me, like you were saying, like this is all the Christmases and whatnot. And we have so much, we get drunk off the chemistry, we get
mm,
drunk off the hormones, we get drunk off the connection. And we forget that there's a couple of things that happen. One is that this person could be terrible for you, right? Like, you have to, if you're looking for long-term partnership, you have to look for other things, right? You have to see if you can build a life with this person. And then number two is, eventually that fades, and what we're left with are two flawed people. And that's when a lot of people start to panic and think, oh, well, I don't feel as amazing around you as I used to. And, like, it must not be love because I don't feel all drunk and high off of these, these feelings anymore. When really love is not just a feeling. Love is an action, it's a verb, it's a practice.
Mm.
And it's something that happens after the honeymoon. It's something that happens after all those crazy hormones have settled down. And it is a practice of giving and meeting needs and receiving love. And it's not just about all that heightened emotion, but we confuse it a lot, and we think, oh, this person must be for me, and I don't even know them. I don't know their character. We've never had a conversation about the kind of relationship we want to build. I have no idea how they are when they're stressed. I have no idea how they are in an argument. I have no idea who they are in the world and what their friends are like and what their family is like. And these are the things that are incredibly important. And
Mm.
so we get carried away, and I've said this before and I'll say it again. Our time on this earth is so fleeting, and there's something very fun about getting carried away. But what I'm encouraging people to recognize is that you're high and you are under hypnosis. And that's the time to really be discerning and to take your time to really get to know someone
Mm.
and to recognize that um, there isn't the one who's coming to complete you. There is the one who, if you are smart enough and lucky enough, well, it's not really luck, it's smart enough to choose someone who agrees on what a life well lived is with you
Mm.
and agrees on what a relationship should be. And so it's very important to understand that, you're not in love when you are obsessing over someone whose character and whose life you don't really know.
Yeah. That is so true. And I have to give this example. When I was at like 19 or 20, I was traveling, and I will never forget, I met this French guy, so he has the great accent, and he was so good looking, like unbelievably good looking. And we ended up getting together, and I was just absolutely head over heels, obviously in lust, but thinking like I was in love. And then
And you were a teenager, basically.
exactly. And I
Hmm.
really did think, like, wow, I'm so lucky. This is amazing. And the more I got to know him, the more I thought, shit, this guy's a real nut job. Like, when the more things he was saying, and the more I realized he wasn't what I had thought in the beginning. There were a lot of issues, and he was kind of then relying on me like I was the savior that had come. And I thought, oh
Mm,
my God, this is really not good. And then looks fade, hey? Like, as soon as
yeah.
you really get to know someone's personality, the guy that I thought was the hottest thing in the world with this gorgeous French accent, suddenly I was not at all really attracted to him, and it didn't last very long. So, to your point, I think we really need to know people in all different situations. Like, how are they, as
Yes.
you said, when they're stressed? What's the family situation like? Just like what is their work ethic? What is their belief
Yes.
on having kids? And I see a lot of people in relationships where they get into a relationship, and you talk about this in your book in one of the scenarios, where they both say they don't want to have kids, and then one kind of says they do, and then the other's not sure, and then they for years are in a relationship to then for it to end, and the woman's in her 40s thinking, well, do I still have time to have kids? Because we kind of came into it thinking we did it, and then things changed. I mean, to me, that's very sad.
Yeah.
That you didn't really know what you thought about a topic that is so important.
Yeah. It is. And it happens all the time. It happens all the time.
Yeah.
And I think it's also just, the kids thing is a conundrum because sometimes it's like you're faced with that choice. Do I choose this relationship or do I choose to leave it so that I can have kids?
Mm.
And I think that a relationship is really going to force you to come to terms with what it is that you really want and what it is that you really need.
Mm.
and what your values are. That's what I want people to really face within themselves. I mean, these are none of the things that I thought about before I got married, and I wasn't taught this.
Mm.
And it would have saved me a lot of heartache. So it's incredibly important. It's incredibly important. And I love your story about the French. You just never know, and and that's part of being a teenager, but there are people in, middle age who are doing that all the time. They're projecting this ideal, and like, maybe when you were a child you saw this French film and this French actor and this guy reminded you of it, right? So
Totally.
these are the totally, right? So this is our conditioning, the imprints, our memories. We see someone that reminds us of this early memory, and then we project an entire ideal onto them. And I just want people to be mindful of that.
Mm. I want to talk now about being in relationship and not knowing what the other person thinks. And this is more from a dating perspective. So for people I know now is like the digital age of dating, which has changed the
Yeah.
landscape for a lot of people. And I saw this really interesting video the other day and I thought, God, this is so true. The girl was talking about relationships, and I think she might have been a celebrity of some sort. And she was talking about being on the red carpet at the Academy Awards and saying she was dating someone and she still had time to write to them while she was on the red carpet for the Academy Awards because she's like, everyone's got their phone with them. Like, he texted
That's
me, I
really
texted
funny.
him back. And
That's hilarious.
her point was, if they like you, they will text back, because I think when we're in relationship and, we're very eager because we like the other person and we haven't heard from them, we start thinking, well, maybe the text didn't go through or maybe their phone broke or like these scenarios, which are like, really, how often does that happen? And I wonder,
Yes.
from your experience, how does one person know if, from a dating perspective, the other person's just not into them?
They're not making plans with you. You're getting the sense that they're trying very hard to get into bed with you, but they're not really trying to take the time to get to know you. They're
Mm.
not texting you back. They're not making plans for the future, whether that's next week date. um, Someone who's really into you, let's say they're the pursuing role. They're going to want to make that date. Look, there are also people who are parents and might say they really are struggling with creating space for someone, but they're going to try to make it happen.
Mm.
So yeah, we have to stop lying to ourselves and making those excuses. And look, they could be there also could be a reason why they're not pursuing it, that has, maybe they're just not sure and they're in their heads about something else. It's never a reflection of your worth, and that's the most important thing. But stop making excuses. If someone's really into you, they're gonna show it.
Yeah, I do agree. And, obviously people in relationships sometimes take roles. So there's one, again, more from a dating perspective, that will be more the person that's pursuing that person,
Yes.
and the
It's
other
usually
one,
the men, if yeah, it's usually a man pursuing a woman if we're talking about a heteronormative, but it's a little
yes.
bit more fluid in gay relationships. Yeah.
For any women out there who are gung ho and find themselves always in the position of the one pursuing, do you think that is a good thing? Do you think it matters? Is it like, are we still kind of more in that the male needs to pursue? What do you find through your experience? Is there even a right way? I mean, how does one kind of
Yeah.
navigate that?
So what I would say is, if you're a woman and you like to be let's say you're a heterosexual woman and you like to be pursued by men, then if you're going to pursue a man, you are just going to get exactly the man you don't want. But if you are sort of more of the aggressor, then you're probably going to feel more comfortable with a passive man.
Mm.
So, and that's just the law of, that's just how it goes. That's just really how it goes. This isn't about playing hard to get. I think if you like someone and someone's pursuing you, you should make it very known to them that you like it, and that you're receptive. But I do think that if you're someone who likes to be pursued, you have to really let them pursue you.
Mm.
And that doesn't mean that you can't make the first move. Like, hey, I would really love for the way that you can do it if you like to be pursued is like, I would really love for you to take me to coffee.
Mm.
And you can be flirtatious about it. But I do actually think it's important. I think it's important for those who like to pursue, and those who like to be pursued don't the guy who's not doing that, he's gotten lazy and he's passive and he's just never going to be right. So don't step into the role that you don't want to step into.
Yes. I wonder now, talking about doing the inner work, for you, you speak about in the book, you talked about your father and how
Yeah.
he was a psychologist. And from a young age, because, you know, you were a child and you may have cried a lot or had tantrums here, you know, what any child does do, that he labeled you as the difficult child.
Yeah, he was
And
a psychiatrist. Yes, a
yes, a
child and family
psychiatrist.
psychiatrist. Yeah.
And so that was your label. You were the difficult child, which, I mean, you know, no one wants to be labeled as that. And then, and then, especially when their dad's a psychiatrist. And
I
then,
mean, seriously.
yeah. And then obviously there are wounds that come out of that. And it's so interesting because there are a lot of people I've spoken to on the podcast recently. Actually, a lot of them have been men who have come with these real daddy wounds.
Mm.
I think it's a lot of people can relate to having wounds, maybe from their father, maybe from their mother. How have you dealt with that?
So when I was 21 years old, I decided not to answer my father's calls for like 13 years. And I thought that um, if I could just pretend like he didn't exist, then everything would be fine. And in some ways, my life became a little bit easier. But in more ways, it became more difficult because estrangement, unless it's absolutely necessary for your safety, actually causes more harm than it does not. Because what I did is I went into an avoidance. I avoided him. And I think that whenever you avoid anything, it takes a tremendous amount of energy to avoid. Because the very definition of avoiding is like, you know, you should be doing this thing, but you're not facing it. And that takes a lot more physical, mental, and psychological energy than it is to just face it. And when you avoid something, you're making something actually have greater weight and significance than it actually does. It becomes bigger, the monster grows. And so I avoided that. I avoided my feelings about it. And, you know, what's interesting is that I had one of the loveliest relationships I've ever had with a wonderful person. So there's no, you know, nothing's foolproof. So I had that while I was going through that estrangement. But then after that relationship ended, and it ended on good terms, and we're still in contact today, so many years later, and we were together for almost 6 years, and it was just I have nothing but like really warm memories about that relationship. But when that relationship ended, it was like a series of just not really good relationships, or there'd be some casual flings that were fun, but the relationships were just troublesome. And why, the daddy stuff really started to come up for me later in life rather than when I was younger. I mean, it also came up for me when I was younger too. It was just a hodgepodge. And so I thought, if I don't deal with this, I don't deal with this, it finally dawned on me that it was going to haunt me. And so even though from a young age, because my father like put me in therapy when I was 12 to kind of figure out my relationship with him, but it was all done terribly wrong. And even though I'd been in and out of therapists talking about my father, um, nothing helped. And so I I decided, using the tools that I learned from just learning about belief systems and stories and coaching and the body, mind, body, I decided to really think about letting go of all the anger and all the hurt. And that was not an overnight process, but I had to remind myself often that my reaction to him, which was sort of very strong, was because I was still seeing him through the eyes of my little girl self.
Mm.
And I was very afraid of him. And he was just very dark and very passive aggressive. And he was very scary to me. I always felt very uncomfortable around him. I never knew what mood he would be in. He had bipolar, a very severe form of bipolar, and it wasn't diagnosed. And because he was a psychiatrist, he could, self-medicate. And but it wasn't self-medication in the way that was good. And I thought, I have to start to see him differently, and in order to see him differently, and I've never said this before, but it's coming to me now, I had to start to see myself differently.
Mm.
So rather than seeing myself as the helpless, overly vulnerable child who couldn't sort of protect herself against the big bad wolf, I was now an adult. And I didn't have to see myself as that anymore. And I brought in my spiritual practice with this. It was all of it. This was just sort of the way, I started to think about things very differently, obviously with my yoga practice, but then even more when I started to do this work, close to 11 years ago, I really started to look at things differently, and relationships differently, and psychology differently. And I went from being very afraid and avoidant of him to not being as afraid or avoidant, but kind of being a bitch. So the pendulum swung in the other direction. So if he did something, I had to let him know, God damn it. And I had to put that really iron boundary down. And so I think that was an improvement. But then I realized, how much my ego was driving that. And, I think losing my mom and going through the divorce and all of that, and then learning all these tools, you learn a thing or two about life and the fragility of it when you lose people you love, and especially when people you love die. It ages you.
Mm.
And what I mean by that, it gives you wisdom. But it does, and I think, I associate age with wisdom, and so it ages you. And so you realize how, how important this is. And I did not want to be, now that I was really doing this work and stepping into my role as sort of an expert on this, right? I wanted to never be in the type of relationship that I was in with my ex-husband ever again. I made the decision, I don't want to be the woman in midlife with daddy issues. No, I just don't want to do that. There was no reason for me to process this in therapy. I really was able to process this alone and with my mentors. And so, and that's just me. I'm not saying that that's anyone else's journey. This is my journey. And I think it was a combination of that and him getting older and me trying to let go of the story, the narrative that I was so controlled by and so attached to, that made him a huge villain.
Mm.
And so I started to just soften, and I think that he started to soften, and he died, he died a year ago, exactly yesterday, as I was writing this final chapter on healing relationship with parents. And, the timing of that was not lost on me. But I just didn't want to hold on to that anger anymore.
Mm.
And our relationship did not become tight or close. It didn't become rainbows and unicorns and lollipops. And I wish I had a little bit more time to transcend my own fear and ego and wounds to step up into an even higher version of myself, but I did the best that I could. And I think that um, that is enough. And the thing is, even after someone dies, you can continue that healing work.
Mm,
You don't have to, it doesn't stop. You can continue to process and let go. And when you talk about that person, there's a different feeling inside of you as you do that.
mm,
And so the healing continues.
mm. Thank you for being so honest. You know, I even feel just through you saying that there is like a sort of a beautiful grace there, and that you can tell that it's been a long journey for yourself, but you can just tell there's a lot of healing that's been done. And I think it's so important for people to hear that, as you said, just because someone dies doesn't mean the healing doesn't continue, because you're still alive and it's important for that healing to continue.
Yes, absolutely.
I wonder, Jillian, you spoke before about spiritual practices that you do. What are those spiritual practices?
Well, first and foremost, it's the practice of yoga asana. I've been practicing for 25 years, and it's one of the most important things in my life. I wouldn't say it's the most, but it's one of the most important. It's in the top, I've got family, my dog, and there you go, right? Um, so that's my deepest spiritual practice. And I've been a meditator for many years.
Mm,
So, those are my spiritual practices that regulate my nervous system, that give me a greater connection to self and opens up my mind.
mm,
Because when we get very closed-mindedness is just sort of in many ways mimics a very dysregulated nervous system, I
mm,
think. And so I those are my spiritual practices. And then I mean, these are not so cliched spiritual practices, but I do love to dance, and I take long walks, and I do find that spending time with friends in a way is a spiritual practice.
mm.
So yeah.
What's some of the best advice can be about relationships or just anything that you've ever received?
Well, there's a few things. So one is a little like it's going to be funny. So let me brace you. I remember I used to go crazy over boys, sort of like how you went crazy for the French boy. And that started, I think, around 12 or 13 for me. I think that's pretty common. And then in my teenage years, I would just meet a boy and I would just go absolutely like crazy. And my mom would really try to ground me. And she would tell me, you need to picture them on the toilet making a poop.
I love that. I love it.
And it was really good advice because because it taught me that they're human too,
Mm,
and to not see them as this sort of superhuman that was better than me.
mm.
So that's some of the best advice I ever got.
Amazing.
Yeah, and some of the best advice I've also received is, um, you know, there is no one who's going to lie to you more than yourself. So you
Mm,
have to really, you know, first and foremost, just be mindful of when you're telling yourself a lie and when you're telling yourself the truth. Um, I've also been given the advice that you can have a good cry, and you can really feel sorry for yourself, but tomorrow's a new day and you have to pull up your socks and you've got to face the day because life goes on.
mm. It's true. What is the lesson that has taken you the longest to learn?
Hmm. Hmm. I think that I'm continuously still learning how to just let go.
Mm,
And that could be like a daily thing. Let go of the fact that it's cloudy when you want it to be sunny. Let go of the fact that something's not going your way. Um, when you let go, you're going to be a lot happier. And I know this. And I think this is probably one of the hardest lessons for anyone to learn. But this is the thing that I am constantly sort of confronted with.
Yeah. There was a sign I wanted to write. I haven't done it yet and put on my pinboard where I do a lot of my work because I'm feeling the same. And it was like, let go and let God. And
Yeah.
I'm not a religious person, but I think sometimes you just gotta go, all right, like I've done as
Yes.
much as I can do.
And then you have to let it go,
Yeah. I wonder, do
not
you have,
control.
yes, surrender.
Yeah.
Do you have a
Yeah.
favorite prayer or saying or mantra?
You know, I really do believe that when there's a will, there's a way.
Mm,
I live my life that way. Um, and that's it.
mm,
That truly is it. I mean, I have certain mantras that I love that are in Sanskrit
yeah.
that are not in English. That I sometimes say to myself, like Om Namah Shivaya,
Mm,
Om Namah Shivaya, Om Namah Shivaya, Om Namah Shivaya. But yeah, that's typically it. I'm not. Those are like the
yeah.
incantations that I say. I'm like, like sometimes I just say, you can do it, you can do it, you can do it.
Mm. And our
Yeah.
final question, what is a life of greatness to you?
Hmm. I think a life of greatness is when you are living the life that is the life that you want to live. I think that a life of greatness is also a life where you are making an impact and giving back to people. And I think ultimately a life of greatness is one where have been able to discover what gives your life meaning.
Mm,
And I don't think it really has really anything to do with achievement or anything like that, even though that can add greatness to your life. I really envy the people who um, have a large degree of wanderlust and just go for it
mm,
and don't play life so safely.
mm. I agree. Jillian, I have enjoyed this conversation immensely today. You are an absolute wealth of knowledge. As I mentioned, It Begins With You is really for anyone wanting to know more about relationships, who's in a relationship, who just wants a good read. It's a fantastic book. I enjoyed it immensely. Thank you so
Oh, I
much.
appreciate it. Thank you so much for having me.